Hello, and welcome to our lunch hour learning webinar, Green Bylaws in Action on Vancouver Island. I'm Renee Frappier, coordinator for SABC's Green Bylaws Toolkit project and host for today's session. We're going to discuss some of the earnest work of local governments that want to prioritize the implementation of green practices, projects, policies, and bylaws on the island. But first, I'd like to acknowledge that all of this work is happening on the traditional and unceded territories of the Kwakwaka'wakw, Nuu-chah-nulth, and Coast Salish peoples who have stewarded these lands and waters since time immemorial. In case you aren't familiar with the Stewardship Center, we're a non-for-profit society that focuses on providing science-based information, tools, and resources to help individuals, organizations, and local governments make informed ecological stewardship decisions, like the Green Bylaws Toolkit. And we always work collaboratively, relying on partner organizations, technical experts, and funders to achieve our common goals. Our work falls under three broad categories. Green shores, nature-based solutions for shoreline protection, wildlife and species at risk, which includes the Green Bylaws Toolkit for local governments, and our popular Cats and Birds project. And third is strengthening stewardship, which includes our new project, Green Spaces for All, which seeks to work to provide equitable access to health and resiliency benefits of green spaces within all communities of Vancouver Island, but focusing first on urban and semi-urban communities. As this is a Zoom webinar, your video is turned off and your microphones are muted. However, you can type your questions into the chat and we'll do our best to answer all of them. Now, I'd like to present my co-host, Ione Smith. Ione is a professional agrologist with a background in agricultural planning and land resource science. She founded Upland Agricultural Consulting in 2010, specializing in innovative agriculture and food security plans, climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies, and farm business plans. She has worked with Indigenous communities, all levels of government, and non-governmental organizations as well. In addition to her consulting work, Ione serves as Vice Chair of the Agricultural Land Commission and is an instructor at SFU, where she teaches community economic development approaches to food. And now I'd like to turn you over to Ione. Thank you very much.
A lot, Renee. Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm just going to start up my slides. And I'm going to provide just a quick outline of the Green Bylaws Toolkit, the third edition, before I hand it over to our panel speakers. So first of all, I wanted to provide a bit of context for some of the topic areas that are going to be touched on today, particularly around green infrastructure. I really wanted to just give a better definition for all of us so that we can grasp it and kind of wrap our heads around it as we delve into the panel discussions. Really, green infrastructure is what can be considered as natural and semi-natural areas with environmental and engineered features. And it's considered to be the sum total of ecosystem elements that maintain biodiversity and functioning of ecosystems. It can be considered as the foundation of our communities, and it requires a network of connectivity in order to thrive. Local governments have an important role because they aim to plan and manage within their areas to enhance nature's ability to deliver a wide range of ecosystem services and to support biodiversity in both rural and urban settings, thereby providing economic, environmental, and societal benefits to people. These can be planned strategically to create what is considered as a green infrastructure network. And green infrastructure and biodiversity are best protected and enhanced when they're considered together. Areas of biodiversity can be connected through green infrastructure. The mechanism under which local authorities can support the natural environment and biodiversity comes primarily through the provincial government, who delegates powers to local governments through the Local Government Act and the Community Charter. Some of the most important authority for environmental protection relates to land use, tools, and levers, such as regional growth strategies, official community plans, zoning bylaws, and the ability to establish development permit areas as well. However, other powers, such as for regulatory bylaws around tree or watercourse protection or soil deposit and removal, can also play an important role. Local governments have significant authority for green infrastructure and protection of the natural environment, and there's still a lot of room for improvement. There's no local government that uses the full extent of their powers for protecting and restoring the natural environment, to our knowledge in BC. The overarching goal is to take a nested approach for green bylaws, to focus on green bylaws throughout the whole policy and regulatory infrastructure at all scales. So for the third update to the Green Bylaws Toolkit, there were 3 key observations that were made about the structure of local government ecological protection. The first is that local governments must take a nested approach to environmental health, from a regional plan focused on connectivity to local government-specific commitments and regulations for individual properties. There's also the need for planning for both the bylaws and the community support, because people will not subject themselves to regulations unless it's part of something bigger that creates a culture of conservation. Third, there must be a focus on healthy communities, both ecosystems and biodiversity, rather than allowing the conversation to center on individual property rights regarding land. It's about water management, compact, efficient development, protection of property, and biodiversity. Fourth, creating ecosystem-based measurable performance objectives or targets, such as 95% of new development will occur within the urban containment boundary, or the community aims to restore 5 kilometers of riparian habitat specific to a standard. This creates better direction for the exercise of discretion in individual decisions about bylaws or applications to staff and council. It can include overall metrics that are embedded in regional data or plans and projects with milestones. Lastly, we have seen very general guidelines with good results. We have also seen detailed mapping and guidelines with poor uptake. So the idea being that there's a lot of data and information out there, and it's perhaps time to stop focusing on gathering information and data rather than acting on what we've already got. So with that in mind, I am going to turn it over to our panelists. Each panelist will have about 10 minutes to present, and then we will have time for questions and answers. So as you hear what the panelists have to say, if you have some questions in mind, please put them in the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen. And I'm just going to introduce each of our panelists before I pass it over to them. So our first speaker is Keith Lawrence. Keith is with the Cowichan Valley Regional District. He's a senior environmental analyst on the environmental services team. The team's responsible for a variety of programs and initiatives that include the development of watershed management plans and other long-range plans, such as watershed planning, liquid waste plans that have the goal of protecting water resources. They also deal with responses to climate change impacts, such as risk assessments and adaptation strategies, as well as hazards analysis, mitigation and preparation to meet changing attributes of the region's landscape, which are affecting municipalities, and also working with a wide variety of partners to protect environmental resources and values in the Cowichan Valley, such as air quality, ecosystems, and species at risk. Keith's presentation will focus on how Cowichan is adapting to the new normal. Our second presenter is Jamai Schile. Jamai, as a planning professional, works with diverse communities across the region to plan for and create sustainable, resilient communities with the Regional District of Nanaimo. Jamai has special expertise in growth management, risk-based planning, and project management. She's currently leading the update of the RDN's regional growth strategy and is the project lead of the RDN's Sea Level Rise and Climate Adaptation Program. Prior to this, Jamai worked in the environmental consulting sector in BC and in regional government in England. And Jamai's presentation is going to be on the role of regional planning in shoreline protection. Our third speaker is Paul de Greeff with the District of Saanich. Paul co-founded Murdoch de Greeff Incorporated Landscape Architects in 2007 and is based in Victoria, where he's been consulting and teaching for over 15 years. As a registered landscape architect, Paul specializes in site analysis, landscape planning, and site adaptive design. Paul has worked with multidisciplinary planning and design teams on a wide range of private and public sector projects, including housing projects, urban commercial and high-rise projects, park design, campus master planning, and ecological restoration projects. Paul also holds an adjunct professor position at UBC's new urban forestry program and teaches in the environmental studies program at the University of Victoria. So I'm going to hand it over to Keith now.
Thank you so much, Ione and Renee, for that welcome and introduction. And we'll just get started here with the next presentation. Again, thank you. And it is an honor to have the opportunity to present the Cowichan Adapts strategy. So before we get started, again, Keith Lawrence with Environmental Services at the CVRD. I'm merely presenting the strategy and coordinated pulling it together, but it's the result of the work of numerous partners across the region, including our municipal partners, First Nations partners, provincial agencies, island health and stewardship groups. And so, and also before we get started, also want to acknowledge that it is with deep gratitude that I have the opportunity to join you from the traditional and unceded territories of the Cowichan, Malahat, Pahquitchin, Subaset, Halalt, Penelakut, Staminas, Liaxin, Dididat, and Pachidat peoples. And having said that, we recognize that First Nations communities in our region are disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate change. And as we gather, we seek to honor the leadership and climate resilience of this region's Indigenous communities and nations that have been stewarding these lands for thousands of years. And as a piece of background here to get us started on this narrative about the development of the strategy, some key background in terms of the timeline, which really began many years before the dates noted here with a variety of projects, but more formally came together in the 2014 to 2018 strategic plan of the CVRD, where the CVRD board prioritized the development of that strategy. And then through this series of work, which I'll share with you, that opportunity to have the board adopt the strategy. And so with that, in the years that came, walking through a process to develop an implementation plan, which the board also adopted then in 2022. And that sets out the action board in the short and long term. As we develop those components of the strategy, we continue to bring them forward for progress updates. And ultimately, the strategy follows the provincial guidelines for preparing climate change adaptation strategies and adapting to the impacts to come. And so we provide this reminder of how the strategy really does focus on adaptation rather than mitigation, but at the same time recognizing that there's many actions within the strategy that will have co-benefits. So not only being able to help us adapt to the impacts of climate change, but also help to reduce our carbon footprint. And it is also helpful for us to consider where we've come from in terms of climate impacts and the journey thus far, to help us understand some of those steps that we can expect to see into the future. But essentially, one of these key teachable moments was in 2003, where we had significant wildfire in the Okanagan, as well as drought across BC, and then also flood in the Squamish-Pemberton corridor. But it was also a year of significant drought in the Cowichan watershed, and the first year that salmon had to be trucked up the river for spawning. And then also corresponding to that, though, that level of impact, there was a coming together of groups that recognized this need for action, and so that led to the formation of this Cowichan Stewardship Roundtable, which was pulled together to respond to drought. And then in the years to come, when we arrived at 2015, which was really this first year of extremes becoming our new climate reality, when we had the beginning of 8 years of successive drought in the province, and some of those being the most significant for wildfire impacts in our province's history. But it was also the year when we began developing the adaptation strategy and launching a new normal communications drought program, and then moving on to 2021 when we experienced both heat dome and significant atmospheric river event across the province. And again, a key milestone that year for this development of the strategy, in the sense that that was the year that it was adopted. And so we continue to track these impacts that were described to us in our projections document, which formed a key part of our process to help us develop the strategy. And that was that first phase of work there, to have collaboration with Pacific Climate Impacts Consortium, as well as a number of partners to develop downscaled projections for the region, which not only tell us about precipitation patterns and temperature patterns and storm event frequencies going forward that we can anticipate out to 2080, but also what we can expect in the way of impacts. What does it all mean? And so that supports this second phase of work relating to vulnerability and risk assessments, which I'll mention in a moment, as well as this key component of developing the adaptation strategy, a parallel piece of work, as we talked about, with the greenhouse gas mitigation, and then all the way leading through to implementation. And so those impacts that we can expect include those summers to become hotter, in terms of a metric, this expectation that we can have a double in the number of summer days with temperature above 25 degrees Celsius, for example. And we can also expect our summers to be drier with an uneven distribution of precipitation, meaning that we won't get enough rain when we need it most in that dry season, when we do see that increased demand for usage. And also the increase in intensity of rainstorms events that can ultimately lead to more risk of flooding, but also landslide hazards. And so that leads to this next piece of work, which is connecting the impacts to solutions. And so on a number of fronts, which is in this strategy considered in 4 thematic areas. So it's considered across infrastructure, but also health and safety, business and economy, as well as our environment. And to be able to do that, we conducted a number of risk assessments across the region relating to sea level rise, flooding, landslide, and wildfire. And so in particular, to show a bit in terms of where some of those hazards were spatially located, we had this opportunity through funding from the provincial and federal government to do regional floodplain risk assessment and floodplain mapping in some of the key provincially designated floodplain areas of the Lower Cowichan Cooksila, the Cowichan River, the Chemainus River, and around Shawnigan Lake, as well as landslide risk analysis in a number of areas, and coastal sea level rise risk assessment across the marine portions of our region. And this work came together to through a series of workshops with those various partners to develop actions for each of these impacts that we can expect in the years to come. And so the strategy essentially consists of a vision with 6 goals, and then actions organized around these 5 thematic areas and 20 objectives, in all 39 prioritized actions. And so they include those 4 thematic areas, as well as a 5th thematic area of cross-cutting actions that essentially support capacity building, knowledge sharing, keeping up to speed with best practices, so that they support all of the other actions that address those impacts. And so in that first thematic area of resilient and green and gray infrastructure, to provide a bit of a snapshot here in terms of these are some of the high priority actions in that cluster. And the first 2 of those relate to asset management, so essentially that climate risk assessment. Second 2 relate to planning and engineering standards, and then the 2 after that relate to watershed management and infrastructure planning. And so in particular, to highlight some of the great work being done by our CVRD Land Use Services group, who are leading the process to modernize the official community plan. And so that's bringing together all of the 9 electoral areas to have one modernized officially community plan. The first of those 8 goals, to note that it is about mitigating and adapting to the climate crisis. And so the modernized OCPC also includes 9 local area plans that support this adaptation objective of having complete communities to support meeting the needs of folks within those communities as much as possible. Lots of work around development permit areas with updating to consider adaptation and mitigation considerations, and then this process to combine zoning bylaws into one zoning bylaw, which ultimately can support those complete and communities as well. So this next cluster around community health and emergency management, which is highlighted by a couple projects, in particular being led by Emergency Management Cowichan, which includes this hazard, risk, and vulnerability assessment of 5 key hazards. It's a legislative requirement under the Emergency and Disaster Management Act. So it not only informs and prioritizes elements within the emergency management program, but it can also inform connecting the dots on what Ione was noting about these regulatory tools. It helps to inform what tools are needing to be developed and how they should be developed. And so that this is also a key piece of work for that reason, and also acknowledging the great work by Municipality of North Cowichan to do climate risk assessment as well, which has a focus on addressing impacts to municipal service delivery. There's also this cluster around green growth and sustainable development, which has a number of actions being led by our economic development group, as well as this cluster for ecosystems and bioregional carrying capacity, which is highlighted by a few projects that are linked to bylaws as well, which support this green bylaws theme as well, because in a sense, these bylaws, for example, the drinking water and watershed protection bylaw, essentially gave us the authority to develop a drinking water and watershed protection plan, as well as raise the funding to do that, but also to be able to go forward with actions relating to public education, assessing needs for green and gray infrastructure, doing water conservation planning, and providing funding to various partners. And another example in that thematic area is the action that is needed to clarify water restriction stages and coordinate messaging to folks in water system service areas. And that's done through the bylaw to manage CVRD water systems. And so again, that interface with a regulatory tool, which is very much necessary to support climate adaptation. And similarly, noting the importance of invasive species bylaws. That is also a component of the adaptation strategy, that we continue to identify new plants for inclusion in the noxious weed control bylaw, so that those plants are prohibited on private properties. And then, of course, this cluster of actions that can support capacity building and relationship building, ultimately to help us move forward on the actions in the strategy, but also support the priorities of our partnering organizations. And with that, thank you so much. And most importantly, providing an opportunity to hear from the reflections of folks and questions that are much appreciated as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Keith. That was a great sort of bird's eye, 30,000 foot view of everything that's going on. I know that you've been managing quite a lot of projects, so it's great to get that overview of them. We're going to turn it over to Jamai now. And if people do have some questions for Keith, I encourage you to put them into the Q&A function. And Renee, our host, is going to be moderating a Q&A period after the 3 panelists' presentations. So I'll turn it over to you, Jamai.
Thank you, Ione. I'll kick us off here by sharing slides. There we go. Should have slides up.
Looks great.
Disappear there. Yeah, so I did switch up my presentation title a little bit, to be a little bit more broader than just shoreline protection, and to be consistent with today's important theme on green infrastructure. So I'll be talking about, at the policy level, the RDN's approach to regional planning as it relates to green infrastructure. There we go, there it goes. Here's a quick overview of the items I'd like to cover off. A little bit about the RDN, what's regional planning here in BC, and how that's implemented in our jurisdiction. And then the important question, hopefully I can ask and answer, is, are we making a difference? So here we are. This is the Regional District of Nanaimo, located on beautiful central Vancouver Island. Our region is within the traditional territories of the Coast Salish nations, which I both humbly and respectfully like to acknowledge, especially the Cowichan, Analyst, and Saanich First Nations. The region is composed of 4 member municipalities, being Nanaimo, Lantzville, Parksville, Matama, and Pelican Beach. We also have 7 unincorporated electoral areas, 3 First Nations I noted. We are a growing community, a growing region. We're at a population now of 170,000 people, and we're anticipated to reach 250,000 people over the next 20 years. Within this diverse region, coastal region, we have a number of ecological protected areas. It includes our rare coastal Douglas fir ecosystems. It contains the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere region. We have 3 major estuary conservation areas, as well as Parksville, Pelican Beach, the wildlife management area. With the steady increase in population and development, regional planning plays a key role in sustainable management, where we aim to strike a balance between rural and urban areas. For the life of me, I cannot get rid of that toolbar on the top of my presentation, which I apologize for. Hopefully it will just disappear. But I'll get myself back on track here. So what is regional planning in BC? A key tool that our region uses is regional growth strategy. This is an approach that's set out in the Local Government Act, and the purpose is, the legislation is identified there. The Regional District went this route in the early 90s, recognizing the need for managing growth and change. We adopted our first RGS in 1997. The bylaw provides a policy framework for regional planning. It sets out the vision, goals, and strategies for integrating sustainability principles in all aspects of land use and local infrastructure planning. It's an important agreement between our member municipalities and electoral areas, and it represents their commitment to sustainable growth. It promotes the importance of coming together with all levels of government and First Nations to achieve the goals set out in the strategy. But this illustrates the relationship with the regional growth strategy to other plans, policies, and implementation tools that are available to planners and anyone in local government. We take an integrated approach to sustainability, which is across all the RDN services. While this sounds good, how do we go about it? The RGS is one of two coordinating documents. It's alongside our board strategic plan. And together, these two guiding documents make sure that the region's local services are consistent with the regional goals to manage growth and to create complete complex communities. This direction flows through to other plans, such as the official community plans that each member municipality and electoral area have. The linkage back to the RGS is through a context statement, which is set out in each of the OCPs. And this statement must set out how each community aspires to align with and support the region's vision and goals to protecting the environment and other goals. The guiding policies are then implemented through regulatory tools such as zoning bylaws, flood hazard mitigation bylaws, development permit areas. These are intended or can be used to protect environmentally sensitive areas, to reduce natural hazards such as steep slope, coastal flooding, and sea level rise. I wanted to highlight a few areas or strengths of the regional growth strategy as it relates to the topic today. I'll start off with our growth management framework. I feel that this is a key tool. And under Goal 4, the intent here is to create compact, complete communities through the framework, which includes our land use designations by establishing growth containment boundaries, which determine where the majority of growth is to be located, which is in the primary our urban areas, such as shaded here on this map in gray, as well as our rural village centers, which are illustrated in shade of yellow. These areas are intended for the majority of growth, protecting our rural landscape and our open spaces from sprawl. Supporting policies, for example, also prevent community water and sewer servicing for large lot areas. Again, this further directs growth into the urban areas which are serviced already. Another policy area that supports green infrastructure is under goal number 5, which is intended to enhance our rural integrity. The RGS strategies include options to achieve more open spaces while minimizing development impacts on the rural landscape. Options include promoting more sustainable subdivision or alternative design as illustrated here. On the left, you'll see a more traditional layout of subdivision, and you can see how little open spaces remain, and you compare that to the illustration on the right, which more of a cluster form of development, which is promoted through our policies. We also have policies that encourage density transfer. This means that the density is shifted from one parcel, such as forest land, to conserve residential land in perpetuity for agriculture, forestry, and for environmental purposes. That way, again, we direct majority of growth to desirable areas while maintaining our valuable resources. And so, are we making a difference? The regional growth strategy provides a mechanism for measuring, monitoring our progress towards the regional growth strategy goals. And we report out on that each year through an annual report. So this is an excerpt from last year's report, the 2022 annual report, with respect to Goal 4, which I talked about, our growth management. And you can see we've definitely been making progress over the last 5-6 years of reporting, with continuing to direct growth that is happening to those urban centers and are reducing the amount of sprawl or further development into our rural context. And similarly, noting on the Goal 5 in terms of rural integrity, we're seeing some positive results One area we're noticing a decline is with respect to lands that are classified as private management forest land. What we think we're seeing there is that as the forestry industry is changing, the use of those lands may be changing and shifting more into residential use. But one of the benefits of the RGS is for lands designated as private managed forest lands, they are already designated to have a minimum parcel size of 50 hectares. So while the use may change, the size of the lot will not. And I'll shift over to goal 2, which focuses on protecting strategies for the environment. And this supports the natural environment and it provides the board with a framework for coordinating efforts to protect, restore, and enhance ecosystem functions across the region. Key policies or key themes within that section includes supporting water-centric planning, land use conservation, minimizing the impact from development are also key themes, as well as reducing risks due to natural hazards such as flooding, slope hazards, erosion, and more. The policies specifically support incorporating best practices while promoting innovation and maximizing co-benefits, including nature-based approaches and programs such as the Green Shores for Home. So how are we doing with respect to that? Again, we're seeing very positive progress since 2018, where we're seeing a steady decrease in water consumption, even though we've been seeing a steady increase in development. And the amount of protected land is steadily increasing. And this is promoted in both the RGS and of course as a key strategy in the board's current strategic plan. And I just wanted to touch on this one. So the policy framework for the regional growth strategy also has enabled us to advance specific programs. So here, what we're seeing is the RDN's Climate Change Adaptation Program. And I contribute the policies set out in Goal 1 under Climate Adaptation Mitigation for the success of this program in terms of continuing to maintain support from elected officials and to attract funding from external funders. Through that strong policy framework, we've been able to develop a program that's not too dissimilar to what we just heard Keith talk about with respect to our neighbors to the south at the Cowichan Valley Regional District. And similarly, this is where we're seeing that the policy is flowed through, and we've done a series of technical studies, and now those are being implemented using core planning tools such as floodplain bylaw and the development permit areas. It's also allowing us to progress this work in terms of also preparing a coastal risk assessment, and then following those results, we'll be moving into developing a coastal climate resiliency strategy. So having covered all those items, it absolutely has been a journey to get here. That's not to say that it's complete. There's still more work to be done. We're currently in the final stages of updating and enhancing our current RGS bylaw. This update carries forward the message, how we grow matters, and it actually places more emphasis on the importance of collaboration between all levels of government, including local First Nations property owners. And it further highlights the importance of integrating the sustainable growth and climate adaptation policies across all levels or all of our service areas. So we are nearing completion on this work. The comments we've received so far have been very positive, and we anticipate be able to update the more modernized version of the RGS this coming summer. And I'd like to end there with my thanks to the organizers and for your attention today. If you'd like to know more about the regional growth strategy, about the current document, as well as the update to the bylaw and our process, please visit our web resources. Otherwise, I can be contacted as seen here. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Ione. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jamai. That was great. It's so nice to see those linkages between all the different levels of policy and programming that's happening at RDN. We're going to turn it over to Paul as our final panelist, and there should be some time for questions at the end. We've got a few questions that are coming up now in Q&A, so I encourage everybody to add to that list, and we will go through those questions at the end. All right, Paul, leave it over to you. Paul, you're on mute still. I can't hear you. There
Sorry
you go.
about that. And you're seeing my screen okay?
Yep, everything's good now.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Keith and Jamai. Great presentations, context of what's happening in your community. I just wanted to acknowledge I'm delighted to be joining you from the traditional territories of the Lekwungen and Wasanich speaking peoples here at the southern tip of Vancouver Island. Beautiful place to live and work. My bio was a little outdated. I'm no longer consulting. I am working for the District of Saanich as the manager of parks planning and development. And I'm going to take a little bit of a different tack. I have a bit of a story for you. And it's a story about what's happened in our community with pursuing green bylaws and then kind of just not really having a whole lot of success with that. In fact, if I'm frank, having things kind of explode. And whenever I talk about this issue, I'm just reminded it's one of my favorite kind of books that relates to environmental planning and change management. It's written by Thomas Homer Dixon. It's called The Ingenuity Gap. And to Ione's point that we have access to data, we have access to information, and we need to act. I think sometimes we forget that the human element is so important, and understanding that social dynamic is complex and difficult to deal with, and that's really true of this story. So I'll just start with giving a little bit of context, where we went, and an opportunity that I've identified as a parks guy in how we can fill the gap in the short term, maybe not so much related to bylaws, but other opportunities that relate to sustainability initiatives and green initiatives. So the context in Saanich, we have this landscape that is just chock-a-block full of special ecosystems, rare and endangered ecosystems, and it's very much about land and landscape. Many of you will know that we have the last remaining vestiges of Garry Oak Meadows in Saanich, a large proportion of the landscape. There's a long tradition of stewardship around Garry Oak ecosystems in Saanich, and we actually have a very large contingent of residents that actually work in our parks regularly, over 200 committed volunteers. So there's this kind of tradition of stewardship in our park system, and you can see from this diagram that it's really land-based. Even the polygons along the shoreline are land-based assessments. So not a lot of focus on shorelines, which is kind of interesting. Same thing here. It's about water coming off the land, less a focus on shorelines, and that's not surprising to me. I think it very much has to do with the types of ecosystems and the focus that on those land-based ecosystems, those terrestrial ecosystems that has existed in our community. The path that Saanich took as an organization was to really focus on green bylaws, to look at the environmental development permit area mechanism in particular as a controlling tool for protecting what remained, and even going as far as looking at restoration of terrestrial ecosystems. I think in that focus, we moved a little bit away from education's incentive-based programs, other tools that we have at our disposal for affecting change. And that's not entirely true. There's lots of other great work that's been going on in Saanich. But I do think at the time there was an interest and certainly a move towards using regulation for affecting behavioral change. This is the sort of land use context that exists in Saanich. All of that kind of darker cream color is our single family residential kind of lower density neighborhoods. The red areas are the identified growth, concentrated growth areas. That's a recent drawing from our OCP update that's underway right now. So, from a shoreline perspective, which is where I'm kind of heading, that's most of our shoreline, marine shoreline, is actually in that kind of, or adjacent to that darker cream colored area that is our single family residential zone. And then moving from context to kind of our story, our recent history, in 2012, our council enacted an environmental development permit area bylaw. It was connected to ecosystem mapping, and it applied it was broad spectrum across the municipality. And as it was administered, as that bylaw was administered, it started to create friction in the community. First time in my career that I had seen it happen, but in 2018, new council was elected, became a very political issue during that election cycle. And in 2018, the bylaw was repealed. That's actually left a bit of a vacuum since, and the community is still, I would say, undergoing kind of this rocky, difficult conversation about where to move forward. Some of the work that has been done to advance that conversation is the formation of the RSTC, which is the Resilient Saanich Technical Committee. A number of experts were brought together to report to council on ideas for moving forward with new bylaws, new biodiversity and conservation strategies, and then in 2023, our environmental services section that had always sat with planning was actually shifted over to the Parks Department. So internally, there was a recognition that maybe, given that Saanich has such a big park system, about almost 800 hectares of parkland within the municipality, there was good reason to bring environmental services into the Parks Department and streamline services to the community. So a bit more of an internal focus, as well as looking at potentially new bylaws. And now the community is working on community and Saanich are working on a biodiversity strategy and an urban forest strategy, updates to those, which again, it's hoped that those will guide future decisions on a path forward. Kind of like this the little face of the single-eyed guy on the rock, that was actually graffitied onto the rock in 2018, and that was kind of the year of blah. So appropriate little graffiti tag. So where to from here? And I'll just take a minute or two just to talk about an opportunity that we've identified in parks for building on the stewardship programs that already exist in Saanich, and it really centers on demonstrating through action and leading by example as a municipal landowner. So we're actually going to be working in partnership with the Stewardship Centre of BC to implement a Green Shores demonstration project. The previous image is actually a project that I worked on as a consultant previously for a homeowner. I believe it achieved a gold standard for Green Shore certification. It's actually located in Saanich. Just a good example of where we'd like to head as an organization to demonstrate leadership. And it's on a parcel of land in front of the house in this image. It's actually parkland owned by the district. And we have worked with the Stewardship Centre to apply for grant funding. We were successful in acquiring that grant funding. We're working with Associated Engineering and DHI, that's the Dutch Hydrological Institute, to conduct some pretty extensive modeling of not just the shoreline, but also the Coquitlam River system that drains into this portion of Portage Inlet. And then we'll start working through a community engagement and sort of staff capacity building exercise. So it's very much about engaging the community in a conversation about expanding stewardship to shorelines. It's about helping staff understand their role in stewardship, and then hopefully building that out in the community and in meaningful conversations through just education and that stewardship model. So we're really excited to move forward with this. I will say that we're not the only community doing this. I know that there's a demonstration project in Esquimalt. There's another one in the Cowichan Valley Regional District. So others that are looking at this stewardship-based, demonstration-based, walking the talk kind of approach to stewardship and changing people's hearts and minds. So thanks very much, and I hope that was meaningful.
That's great. Thank you so much, Paul. So thanks to our panelists, those were some great presentations, and we've seen some questions coming in through the Q&A app. Renee, did any of these questions stand out as one in particular to start with?
Well, I was thinking of going in order of them being asked. So let's do that. Keith, one of our listeners was wondering what types of bylaws were merged when you spoke of 8 into 1.
Oh, yes. So thank you, Kelly, for that one. It is the 8 zoning bylaws. And so I'll put the link into the chat there, but consolidating the 8 zoning bylaws for the 9 electoral areas into 1.
Thank you. And also for you, Keith, do you have any thoughts on the bioregional carrying capacity in provincial legislation on housing density?
Yeah, so another good question. And so one of the key tools towards that goal of supporting this balance of the need for housing, but also maintaining protection of our environmental spaces is our sensitive areas, as well as protection of our watersheds, is our watershed management plans. And so they're a key tool to help us understand bioregional carrying capacity if they're done in a way which is what we're hoping to build into those, is this tool called water balance models. And so essentially water budgets for ground and surface water to help us understand first how much water is available, then how much is needed for environmental flows, and then how much is available for development. And so once we have that understanding, once it's built into the watershed management plan with corresponding actions to help us achieve that water balance, then having that formation of a multi-partner collaborative group in the various watersheds to support the corresponding water licensing discussions that go through the province. And so because in our region we have approximately 40 community water systems and numerous folks on their own independent groundwater wells, it does require that folks go to the province to have a water license to extract water and to use it. But then that discussion needs to happen to help inform that with the science that's available through the backstopping of the watershed management planning process.
That's great. Thank you very much. Here's to take you out of the hot seat, Keith. Here's a question that's for anybody. What are the most important marine-related bylaws in your respective regions that environmental consultants should be aware of that relate to shoreline or marine construction projects?
Yeah, I guess because I'm the planner here, maybe I'll jump in and make a start on this one if you don't mind. So it does vary between jurisdictions for sure. So your best bet is to contact the planning department for the jurisdiction of interest. So speaking from our regional district, what are the ones most relevant if you're a property owner or somebody in construction wanting to develop within the marine coastal area? We do have a designated coastal floodplain, so you need to be aware of that. We have a floodplain bylaw where that information is incorporated. You'd also want to be aware of the OCP policies as it relate to environmental protection, zoning bylaws with respect to setbacks from water bodies, floodplain bylaw, and we're in the process of developing a new coastal flood hazard mitigation bylaw. So going to my point I made earlier, as planners, we have many planning tools. And the idea is that we don't use one, we use many tools, and that they're a lot of times layered. And we need to approach it in that way to be respectful of the legislation and the authority and to address the many uses of the land. So yeah, hopefully I've been able to answer the question.
I can just add really quickly to give some Saanich context. We do not actually have a bylaw that relates to shoreline impacts specifically. As part of the repealing the EDPA bylaw, we actually lost our EDPA bylaw guidelines around shoreline protection. So there's a bit of a vacuum there right now. As a parks manager, I do have some powers under the Local Government Act to affect or manage human behavior on shorelines. So beach fires, access points, that kind of thing. But our controls are actually quite limited. That doesn't mean that there aren't other controls like Fisheries Act and other regulations that apply. And what I like to always tell my students is that it's good to remember that bylaws and even other levels of regulation are human constructs, so they have a tendency of changing over time. So it may be important to keep updating your knowledge on that. Yeah.
Yep.
Great.
I see we're at our end of our time. There's some questions that we didn't get to. The speakers have an opportunity to type some answers into the Q&A, I believe. So if there's time for folks who ask those questions, who want to stay on and see if they can get their questions answered, that's great. But we don't want to hold anyone up who needs to go to another meeting at 1 o'clock. Renee, did you want to say any final closing comments?
Yes, actually, I would like to thank everybody who came today. I really appreciate your time and thank you for joining us for lunch. I would also really like to thank our partners and funders. And here you can see some of them. We can't do any projects without collaboration. And that's true for us. We collaborate with many other organizations, local governments, provincial and federal government. But I think it's important for municipalities to collaborate with each other as well and share their learning. So this is what this is all about. We are going to be sending out a recording of this webinar. So those who aren't able to stay, if we do answer more questions, you will be able to see them in the recording. And I encourage you to go looking for a copy of the Green Bylaws Toolkit. It's available on the Stewardship Center's website, and I will also send out a link within the next few days with the recording. But thank you once again for joining us. Now, for anybody who'd like to stay, we can possibly answer a few more questions. Okay. So Patricia, who's a member of Friends of Bowker Creek and Victoria's Native Plant Study Group, is wondering, is there a particular role on in local government city staff that conservation organizations should work with toward green bylaws?
Yeah, I was just kind of typing an answer to Patricia, and I started down the lines of kind of, you know, areas of or levels of control that that local government has. The gold standard, of course, is land acquisition. So there's a long tradition of land acquisition along stream corridors in Saanich. The Colquitts River corridor is a good example of that. Bowker Creek happens to be in a high density area, and land is extremely expensive. Saanich just purchased a former BC Hydro owned property, about 5 acres of land, and it was several $1 million to purchase that land. So it's difficult for a community to spend that kind of money just on land acquisition. But that is the gold standard because it ultimately allows you to control the use of that land for whatever purpose, whether it's housing or whether it's flood mitigation or ecosystem restoration. But beyond that, yeah, I think you know, I really like the work that the Bowker Creek Stewardship Initiative is engaged in. There's a 100-year blueprint that's being updated. There's all kinds of interesting work that's being done on that corridor that challenges urbanization and just the concentration of density that's going into the watershed right now. I don't think there's an easy fix for that.
Thanks, Paul. Now, Sarah and Claire are wondering, there's lots of reference to green development by municipalities, but it seems that just means references to building codes. So for example, 85 mature cedar trees are being removed for the 10-step code houses. And that seems contradictory. So Sarah is wondering what's being done to require what is on the land or proximal to waterways to be managed and incorporated as part of these developments to protect ecosystem relationships. And that, I think, is directed to you, Jamai.
Thanks, Renee. I'll answer this in the broadest terms because it sounds like this is specific to one of the municipalities within the regional district, not the regional district itself, and it is probably very specific to a certain development that I'm not aware of. So I'm going to speak in general terms. I appreciate the reference to using the word green. I understand there is a green building series, and my colleague supervises that aspect under the climate mitigation aspect of our programming. There's also the zero emissions codes that are coming into play as well. So when we're talking specifically about development of land and what sort of requirements when an individual wishes to develop land that's adjacent to a water course, there's generally a number of requirements in place. For example, the riparian area regulations, which are provincial regulations, may be triggered, and it would require a qualified professional report to determine what is the appropriate setback for development to occur within a proximity of that water course. That'd be one example. Speaking also in terms of if it's within or near to a designated floodplain, such as one of the three rivers in the regional district, Nanaimo, Little Qualicum, or Englishman River, again, it would trigger the floodplain bylaw potentially, and the requirements associated with that in terms of the construction level, setbacks from the water courses, and similar would apply to coastal properties. As far as the tree removal aspect, it's different from a regional district to a municipality. Some municipalities have a tree bylaws, which would regulate the types of trees and the amount of trees to be removed, and what a replant program would look like. Within our regional district context, we have a number of development permit areas. Each electoral area varies, and those focus on both the environmentally sensitive areas as well as hazard considerations. So hopefully it's probably not as detailed as the question was asking for, but I hopefully I've covered the bases there.
Would some other tools be things like development permit area guidelines and the requirements to do things like protect certain types of trees or setbacks from water courses when issuing development permits?
Yeah, so that is one way a development permit area can be used. So unlike something like a floodplain bylaw or zoning bylaw, development permit areas have a broader application. They still apply to three main areas, which is the alterations of land, conditions for subdivision. There's one more, it's escaping me right now, but it's along those same lines related to development. So yeah, it can be used. And a lot of times, as I've tried to emphasize here today, we use all those tools together. So it's generally not just one tool fits all. And ultimately, it's down to the decision of our elected officials, right? So while we prepare our various policies and regulatory tools, when there's a development permit that has been activated, the applicant's responsibility is to show how those guidelines are satisfied. And then that application would then be approved either through delegation to senior planning staff or through to council.
Another one that I've seen used a lot is like an irrevocable letter of credit or a large deposit of funds that need to be set by the developer to the local government in order to ensure that the buffer or the setback or the ecologically important area will be managed and taken care of over time, like a set period of number of years before the funding can be given back. Is that something that both local municipalities and regional districts can do?
Yeah, and it sounds like you're talking about a landscaping bond. Yep, those are tools that can be used. There's different ways to go about that. Sometimes it's a bond taken up front, and that bond is returned to the property owner once the replanting has been completed. There's also other tools that are more incentivizing, because the bond can be more of a penalty. And you could imagine for individual property owner, a bond would mean that they would have to provide a financial security to the local government, and that can range from a few $1,000s to $10,000 or more, depending on the size of the property. And that can be very challenging in terms of the property owner, because that's money out of their bank that's being held with no interest. It's also difficult for local governments to manage those types of bonds, right? Because they'll become financially responsible. That is one tool. A lot of times we prefer incentives to bonds or reserve bonds for larger developments, such as commercial developments or subdivisions. We also use restrictive covenants. So again, through the permitting process, based on the input received by qualified professionals, such as a biologist, we would set certain conditions in which development would occur, and those conditions would be registered as part of a covenant on title. It means that it runs with the land. So even if that property is sold, those conditions still remain in place.
Great. Thanks,
Thank
Jamai.
you. Yeah, sort of related, Joanne is wondering, is there any avenue where the provincial government can intervene? She gives an example of a town that was recently sued by developers. I don't know how recent actually, but they were sued by developers when the town tried to divert single-family building in the area by requiring, I believe it was retention ponds. Anyway, the developer wouldn't have any of it and sued the town, and they backed down. And now some very critical ecosystems have basically been raised. Is there an avenue where a higher power can intervene?
Not to my knowledge. When I looked at that though, I wondered about the zoning bylaw, because the OCP is one thing for land use designation. But the property would also have to be zoned for single family housing. So the local government could decide to upzone it to multiple units, for example. But that was only my initial thought. I don't know if others have some ideas. I haven't heard of, I don't think the province likes to intervene in local government jurisdiction, generally speaking.
That can become just as sticky as arguing with the developers, I think.
Yeah, and the point too about the infill, like the ability to do infill development, we've seen that now for decades, that developers prefer greenfield development because it's cheaper and it's less of a headache in terms of utilities and all sorts of reasons. So
okay, and I think we have one more. What's the rationale for the removal of the dikes along Cowichan Bay? There are concerns in the community that the incursion of seawater, especially when Cow Bay is closed to shellfish due to contamination, that it will place wells at risk. How are these concerns balanced?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So that's a question that's focused for background on in the Cowichan Estuary, downstream end of the Cowichan River watershed and the Cooksila watershed. And I would encourage, if folks are interested, if they want more information, to go directly to the project proponent. So that is the Nature Trust for BC, as well as Ducks Unlimited. And then to respond to it more broadly from our group's perspective, we have a couple initiatives looking at water quality. And so when we look at water quality, we're looking at the entirety of the land area across the CVRD. So that's the 3,475 square kilometers of watershed area. And so the way that we do that is we developed a surface water quality monitoring strategy, which looks at the downstream locations in each of the watersheds, and then works its way up to identify where there are exceedances of water quality objectives. And then we're also working on a groundwater quality monitoring strategy. So we'll be similarly doing that with groundwater quality. We're developing that strategy this year and expecting implementation to follow. The surface water program is already underway, and then we are hoping to have that data analyzed soon so that we can home in on those smaller areas where there are exceedances and identify those solutions that are needed to come to the table. And so, it's watershed water quality is complex in that understanding the various sources, but as a group, we seek to work as upstream as possible to address the solutions, to address the problems. So looking at what can we do to improve water quality downstream by looking at what are the inputs, what are the exacerbating factors from a land use. Coming back to the green bylaws, what are the tools that we need to implement so that we can improve the quality of water that is running off of the various properties within the region, ultimately making its way into streams and tributaries, and then into the marine environment. And so that's the goal, and it's working with the various partners towards that. So excellent question, which really does speak to this whole watershed approach that's needed towards water quality and ultimately protection of marine shoreline areas as well.
Thank you. Well, it is gone 1:15, and I believe we're out of time. But I want to thank everybody again for coming. I want to thank especially you, the panelists, and Ione for this wonderful presentation. I will be sending out a recording within the next few days. And anybody who left early will be able to hear the answers that were provided. Thanks for your great questions, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.